Hey, Middle Street. Hope y'all are doing well. I've been thinking for a few days now, really, about the difference between faith and fear. We've been talking a lot about fear, and I bet you've been thinking about it too, and I bet you have some of your own thoughts about it. I think a lot of times we think about faith and fear as opposites. They're binary, it's black or white, it's one or the other, that you can't have both together. I'm not really sure that's the most helpful way to think about it. I wonder if it would help if we thought about it more like a spectrum, where faith is on one side and fear is on the other, and we're always somewhere in between. So there's always some measure of faith going on in our lives and in our hearts, and always some measure of fear going on in our lives or in our hearts. They're both there at once. And I know maybe you do. I know I can identify times in my life when I've felt both faith and fear at once. Now that can introduce some complications because you might wonder, well, what about all the times the Bible says do not fear? In fact, some people have claimed that the command do not fear is one of the most frequently occurring commands in the Bible. So if it says do not fear, but we've always got some fear in our lives and there's always some element of fear wherever we are on that faith and fear spectrum, how do we manage that? Not to mention, fear is kind of a feeling, and you can't really control your feelings. At least I don't know how to control feelings. If you know, I would love to hear that. So if we can't control our feelings, but the Bible says do not fear, then what do we make of that? Well, we can't control our feelings. That's true, I think, but what we can control is our actions. We can control what we do. And so while in the ideal world, we wouldn't have any fear. We would be totally on the faith side of the spectrum. Maybe a more helpful way to think of it is not don't have a shred of fear in your life, but don't let fear cripple you. In other words, if you think of faith and courage as being related, courage doesn't mean there's no fear in your life. It just means that you don't let fear rule you or control you. We see a good example of this in Exodus 4. So God has just called Moses out of the wilderness and he's sending them back to the Israelites to tell the Israelites, I'm going to lead you out of slavery to Egypt and into freedom. And Moses gives 3 excuses starting at the very beginning of Exodus 4. 3 excuses to God that show us that Moses is terrified. So God says, go to your people and tell them, I'm going to lead you out. And first Moses says, well, what if they don't believe me? And God says, well, then I'll make you able to do miracles. And that's where Moses turns, remember, he throws his staff on the ground and it turns into a snake. And then he can turn water into blood. And then he puts his hand in his cloak and comes out sickly and leprous. And so he's able to do miracles. And then Moses thinks, that's not really good enough. Well, what if I don't know what to say? I'm not really that eloquent. I'm not good at speaking. And God says, I'll be with you and I'll actually guide your lips and I'll teach you what to say. And then finally, Moses is all out of excuses, but he's still afraid. And so he says, please just send somebody else. And God says, I'm going to send you with Aaron, and together you're going to go. What's amazing is that God was with Moses the entire time, and we know that Moses was scared. His response is very clearly showing that he was terrified. But he refused to let his fear rule him. He didn't let fear dictate his life, and God was with him and used him in a very, very powerful way. Moses may not have been able to control his fear. In fact, his fear caused him to backtalk to God. But what Moses could and did do is act in spite of his fear. And the question is, on the backside of that, after all of that had happened, do you think Moses had more faith than when he started? I think he did. You know, very often our faith doesn't come to us fully formed and fully baked. It's not this miraculous event that all of a sudden you're just filled with faith. No, faith comes after we see God work. And we most often see God work when we take steps of faith, when we put him to the test. In other words, our faith very often follows our will. Your faith follows your volition. If you want to build faith, you can actually take steps of faith, act in faith, not letting fear control you or rule your life. and see if that builds your faith and diminishes your fear. Now, I'm not talking about doing anything foolish. I'm not saying go out right now and have contact with as many people as possible. No, of course not. Right now it's wise to maintain social distance and to isolate as much as we can. That's why we're doing our worship services live online instead of in person. And actually, in the next video, I'll lay out what I think is a biblical case, not just a public health case, but a biblical case for social distancing right now. But don't let your faith rule you. Don't let it control you. I wonder if you can think of any areas in your life right now where where fear really has a stranglehold on you. You might ask God, show me how to act in faith and not in fear. Build faith by helping me to act courageously in this moment. He will, because God is always with us. He's Emmanuel. He is God with us. And if He is with us, we have nothing to fear. Hope you find that helpful. I hope you'll join us for our live worship service this Sunday at 10 a.m. The best way to find it, you can either go to our website and click a link to our Facebook page, or just find our Facebook page online, worship with us there. It's going to be a great time as we experiment with some new ways of worshiping, but also staying connected and staying together. Hope you're doing well. Love y'all. See you soon.